Hello, and welcome back to Creepy Chronicles. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy Creepy Chronicles filled with spine-chilling horror, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1. When I was a little girl, I had no idea how the human digestive system worked. To be completely honest, I am 20 years old now, and I still do not think I understand it very well. But when I was 5, my understanding of the human body was much worse. I still remember the first time I heard my stomach growl. I was sitting on the living room floor with a box of crayons spread around me. I had been drawing some kind of princess castle, although the castle looked more like a crooked square with flags on top. The television was playing quietly in the background, and my mom was in the kitchen washing dishes. Then my stomach made a long, deep sound. Grrr! I froze. At first I thought the noise had come from somewhere else. Maybe under the couch. Maybe behind me. I slowly looked around the room. Nothing moved. Then it happened again. This time, I felt the vibration inside my own body. Grrr! I screamed. I jumped to my feet so quickly that I kicked the crayon box across the floor. Mom! I ran into the kitchen crying. My mother nearly dropped the plate she was holding. What happened? There's something in my tummy. She stared at me. What? There's a monster in my tummy. I pressed both hands against my stomach. It's growling. For a second, Mom just looked at me. Then she smiled. She put the plate down, dried her hands, and crouched beside me. There is no monster in your stomach. Yes, there is. No, sweetheart, that sound is normal. It growled at me. She laughed. I did not. At 5 years old, I was absolutely convinced that something horrible was living inside me. Mom tried to explain digestion. She said my stomach was part of my body and that sometimes it made noises when I was hungry or when food was moving through it. I did not believe a word. As far as I was concerned, something alive was in there, something hungry. For years, that idea stayed with me. I would hear my stomach growl and immediately think about the creature hiding inside. Sometimes I imagined it as a tiny dragon. Other times, I pictured some pale little goblin with sharp teeth. I even started eating more because I thought feeding myself meant feeding it too. If I felt my stomach growl before bed, I would sneak into the kitchen and grab crackers or cereal. I thought that if I kept the monster full, it would leave me alone. It sounds ridiculous now. At least, it used to. I carried that fear until I was around 10. By then, school had taught me enough about the human body that I finally started accepting the truths. There was no monster. There were organs, muscles, acids, intestines, normal body functions. That was it. When I was 17, I actually remembered those childhood fears and laughed about them. I even told one of my friends. She teased me for weeks. Every time my stomach made a noise in class, she would whisper, "Careful. Your monster is hungry." I thought it was funny. I thought 5-year-old me had been incredibly stupid. Now I am 20, and I do not think she was stupid anymore. It started on a Monday. At the time, I was working casual shifts at McDonald's. It was not exactly my dream job, but it paid enough to cover rent, groceries, and whatever small amount I could save. I was 4 weeks away from my 21st birthday. That morning, I had eaten a big breakfast before work. Eggs, toast, 2 sausages, coffee, more than enough food. By the time my shift started, I was not hungry at all. I spent most of the morning working near the fry station. Anyone who has worked fast food knows the smell never leaves you. Oil, salt, meat, fried potatoes. Even after you go home and shower, somehow you can still smell it on your hair. I was standing over the fryer, lowering another basket of raw fries into the hot oil, when my stomach suddenly growled. It was loud, really loud. Not the little bubbling sound you sometimes hear when you skip lunch. This sounded deep, almost like something had moved inside me. I immediately looked around. My face felt hot. I was embarrassed. The restaurant was busy, and crappy pop music was playing through the ceiling speakers. Fryers hissed, timers beeped, people shouted orders from the front. Nobody seemed to notice. I relaxed a little. Then my stomach growled again. Longer this time. I pressed an arm against my abdomen. "What the hell?" I whispered. I was not hungry. That was what bothered me. I had eaten less than 3 hours earlier. For the next hour, my stomach would not stop making noises. Every few minutes, another deep gurgling sound came from inside me. I started pressing my stomach against the edge of the counter whenever it happened, hoping to hide the noise. It helped a little. Still, I felt strange, not sick, not exactly, just full, heavy, like I had eaten way too much, even though I had not. When my lunch break finally came, I ordered a Big Mac. I was not really hungry, but I wanted the growling to stop. I ate quickly, almost too quickly. Fries, too. I finished everything in less than 10 minutes, and strangely enough, it worked. My stomach went quiet, completely quiet. I remember sitting there in the break room afterward, staring down at my empty wrapper. I should have thought that was strange. Instead, I felt relieved. The rest of the shift went normally. I went home, watched TV, went to bed. By the end of that week, however, I knew something was wrong. My appetite had changed. I was eating more than usual, much more. I would finish dinner and still feel like I should eat something else. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night feeling desperate for food. Not normal hunger. It felt like a demand, an ache, a pulling sensation somewhere deep in my belly. At first I thought maybe my metabolism had changed. Maybe stress was making me eat more. Maybe I was about to get my period. I came up with every normal explanation possible. But the bigger problem was the bloating. My stomach started to swell. At first it was barely noticeable. I thought it was just from the larger meals. You know how your stomach sticks out a little after eating too much? That was what I assumed. But then I noticed it stayed that way, even first thing in the morning, even after going hours without food. There was a small bulge beneath my belly button, firm, heavy. Sometimes it felt like there was a stone inside me. I would lie in bed at night and press my fingers against it. The skin felt normal, but underneath something felt wrong. Something felt solid. By Thursday, I was getting worried. That afternoon, I went to the mall. I had recently bought a new crop top, and I decided to wear it. I almost changed before leaving because of the swelling, but I told myself I was being insecure. It was probably nothing. I spent an hour walking around stores. Everything felt normal enough. Then I passed the food court. There was a Chick-fil-A nearby. The smell hit me before I even saw the restaurant. Chicken, oil, spices, warm bread. The smell drifted across the entire floor. My stomach reacted instantly. I stopped walking. Something shifted inside me. Not a growl, not digestion, a movement, a real movement. I saw it. The lower part of my stomach pushed slightly to one side, just for a second. Then it settled back. My entire body went stiff. I stared down. People walked around me. Someone bumped my shoulder and kept going. I did not move. I waited. Nothing. Maybe I imagined it. That was what I told myself. Then my stomach growled. The sound was so deep that I felt it against my ribs. I hurried out of the mall. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. I sat in the driver's seat and locked the doors. I remember staring at my stomach for almost a minute. It looked slightly bigger than it had that morning. That was when I finally decided to call a doctor. I pulled out my phone. I searched for the number of the nearby hospital. My thumb had barely started typing when pain exploded through my abdomen. I screamed. The phone fell from my hand. The pain was sudden and violent. It felt like someone had driven a knife deep into my stomach and twisted it. I bent forward over the steering wheel. For a few seconds, I could not breathe. Then it stopped. Just like that. I sat there panting. Tears were already running down my cheeks. What the hell? I slowly reached down for my phone. The moment my fingers touched it, another wave of pain hit me. This one was worse. I cried out so loudly that someone walking past my car looked over. I dropped the phone again. This time, the pain did not feel random. There was a pattern to it. It felt like claws. Something scratching from the inside. Something angry. Something trying to stop me. That thought appeared in my head without warning. Trying to stop me. I went completely still. My childhood memory came back. The living room, the crayon, my mother laughing. There's a monster in my tummy. I sat in my car with both hands pressed against my stomach and suddenly did not feel like laughing anymore. After that day, things became worse quickly. Much too quickly. The swelling increased. My appetite became impossible to control. I ate constantly. Fast food. Bread, meat, cereal, leftovers, anything. The growling only stopped for short periods after I ate. Sometimes I would finish an entire meal and feel another movement inside me immediately afterward, almost like something was turning toward the food. I stopped sleeping properly. At night, I could feel it move. That is the part nobody would believe. I know how insane it sounds, but I felt it. At first, it was tiny motions, little bumps against the inside of my abdomen, then stronger ones. One night, I was lying on my back when something pushed outward beneath my skin. I watched a small lump travel from one side of my stomach to the other, slowly, deliberately. I screamed and rolled out of bed. The lump disappeared. After that, I started wearing oversized clothes. I stopped seeing friends. I called in sick to work. Eventually, I just quit. There was no point anymore. I could barely stand for long periods. The swelling became too obvious to hide. My manager asked whether I needed medical leave. I told him I was done. He sounded confused. I did not care. Money stopped mattering. Work stopped mattering. Everything outside my apartment started feeling far away. The only thing that mattered was what was growing inside me. I tried calling doctors again. Every time I attempted it, the pain came back, sometimes before I even dialed. Once I tried searching my symptoms online. On the second I typed, stomach moving inside body, something slammed against the inside of my abdomen so violently that I fell off my chair. I vomited afterward. That was when I stopped trying to get help. Call me weak, call me stupid. Maybe I am both. But pain teaches you quickly. Whatever is inside me does not want doctors involved. I understand that now. The last week has felt like a dream, or a fever. Days blending into nights, food containers everywhere, curtains closed, the air in my apartment smelling sour and stale. I stopped answering messages. My mother called 17 times yesterday. I watched the phone ring. I could not answer. What would I say? Hi, Mom. Remember when I was 5 and thought there was a monster in my stomach? Turns out I was right. No, there is nothing I can say. And now I am here, lying on the floor of my apartment. My phone is in my left hand. My right hand is resting on my stomach. It is almost midnight. 30 minutes until my birthday. 30 minutes until I turn 21. My stomach is huge now. Not normal bloating. Not pregnancy, not weight gain. It is bigger than a basketball. The skin is stretched tight. The veins beneath it are dark and visible. Every few seconds, something moves underneath. I can actually see different parts pressing against the surface. A bump. Then another, something long dragging across one side. I do not know whether those shapes are arms, legs, a head. I do not want to know. The noises are worse too. Constant gurgling, deep bubbling, wet shifting sounds. Sometimes it reminds me of the fryers back at McDonald's. That violent boiling, oil rolling around the fries. Only this is coming from inside me. I keep thinking about the noises my stomach made when I was a child. How many of them were really my stomach? How many belonged to this thing? Was it always there? Did it grow with me? Did it eat what I ate? When I fed myself extra food as a child because I thought the monster was hungry, was I actually feeding it? That thought makes me want to laugh. Or cry. Maybe both. 5-year-old me knew. She understood something everyone else ignored. The monster was hungry. It always was. I just misunderstood why. I have a theory now. I do not know if it is correct. There is nobody here to tell me. But I think I was never just a person. I think I was an egg, a shell, a container. Maybe humans are not supposed to live past a certain age. Maybe some of us carry something inside us. Something that develops slowly for years. Maybe 21 years is how long it takes. Think about an egg. Something lives inside. It grows. The shell protects it, feeds it, keeps it safe. Then one day, the thing inside becomes too large. It does not need the shell anymore. So it breaks out. The shell is destroyed. The baby lives. I think that is what's happening to me. I am the shell. Whatever is inside me is almost ready. I do not know why my 21st birthday matters. Maybe it does not. Maybe this timing is just coincidence. But I can feel something changing as midnight approaches. The movements are stronger, more impatient. Every few minutes there is pressure just beneath my ribs, then lower, then back again, like it is testing the walls, looking for the weakest place. I check the time again. 22 minutes. I wonder what it looks like. That sounds strange considering I am terrified. But part of me is curious. I have spent almost my entire life carrying it. Maybe I deserve to see it. Maybe just once. One look before I die. I am almost certain I will die. I do not think there is any version of this where I survive. My skin already feels like it is tearing in places. There are thin red lines across my stomach. Not cuts. Not yet. But stress marks that look far too dark. Sometimes I hear tiny popping sounds from inside me. I try not to think about what they are. Bones shifting, organs being moved, something making space. There are 17 minutes left now. My stomach just moved again. A huge section on the right side lifted nearly 2 inches. I could see the outline of something rounded beneath the skin. It stayed there, pressed outward, then slowly disappeared. I whispered, "Hello." I do not know why. The room stayed quiet. Then my stomach growled. I started laughing. I could not stop. For almost a full minute, I lay here laughing with tears running down the sides of my face. All those years, all those jokes, all those times I told myself there was nothing there. I should have trusted the child I used to be. Maybe children notice things adults train themselves to ignore. Maybe that is why they are scared of dark rooms, closets, under beds, strange noises, things moving in the corner of their eye. Adults tell them monsters do not exist because adults need that to be true. Maybe we are wrong. 10 minutes. The pressure is getting worse. I can barely type. My hands are shaking. There's a cake beside me. I bought it yesterday. Chocolate, my favorite. Or at least it used to be. I am not hungry anymore. For the first time in weeks, I feel completely full. But my stomach is growling harder than ever. I think it is not asking for food now. I think it knows. 7 minutes. I put 21 candles on the cake earlier. I did not light them. That felt stupid. There's nobody here to sing. Besides, I think there are technically 2 birthdays tonight. Mine. And maybe that is why I bought the cake. Some part of me wanted to celebrate. I keep looking at it. The frosting is already starting to soften. I wonder whether the thing will eat after it comes out. That thought is strangely comforting. Maybe I was feeding it all these years, and maybe that is the only kind thing I ever did for it. 5 minutes. Something just scratched inside me. I heard it this time. Not felt. Heard. A dry scrape beneath the skin. I screamed. My stomach tightened. There is blood on my shirt now. I do not know where it came from. The fabric near my belly button is wet. I am scared. I am really scared. 3 minutes. Mom is calling again. I cannot answer. I wish I could hear her voice. I wish I had called her earlier. I wish I had let someone help me. But it is too late. Something is pushing down now, hard. My whole stomach is changing shape. I can see the skin stretching. There is a line forming across the middle, like something underneath is pressing one sharp edge against me. 1 minute. I think this is it. I do not know if anyone will ever read this. Maybe the police will find my phone. Maybe Mom will. If she does, I hope she remembers that day when I was 5. I hope she remembers me running into the kitchen. I hope she remembers what I told her. There was a monster in my tummy. I was right. Midnight is almost here. The cake is still beside me. 21 candles. Chocolate frosting. I can barely breathe. The thing is moving again. Harder. Harder. I think it is coming. Well, looks like it is almost time for our birthdays. There's a cake on the floor next to me. I hope it enjoys it. Story 2. The first time my daughter drew the house, I thought it was cute. She was 4 years old at the time, sitting at our kitchen table with crayons spread everywhere around her. Some were broken, some had the paper peeled halfway off, and a few had rolled onto the floor. She had been drawing quietly for almost half an hour while I cooked dinner. My wife was sitting in the living room with her laptop, answering emails from work. It was one of those completely normal evenings that you never think about while they are happening. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing seemed important. If someone had asked me then what I would remember about that night years later, I probably would have said nothing. I wish that had been true. I was standing near the stove when I heard my daughter call me. "Look, Daddy." I turned around. She held up the piece of paper proudly. At first, I smiled. It was exactly the sort of picture you would expect from a 4-year-old. There was a square house with a triangle roof, a crooked little chimney, and a tree beside it. In the corner, she had drawn a giant yellow sun with long lines coming out from every direction. The windows were simple blue squares. The door was red. I was about to tell her how nice it looked when I noticed something strange. In the upstairs window, she had drawn a small black stick figure. It was only a few lines. A circle for the head, one straight line for the body, two arms. But the figure was clearly standing behind the glass. I pointed at it. "Who's that?" My daughter looked at me like she didn't understand the question. "What do you mean?" "The person in the window." She looked down at the drawing. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she picked up a red crayon and began coloring over the black figure. She pressed hard. The red crayon moved back and forth until the figure disappeared beneath thick red lines. "That's not a person," she said. I laughed a little. "Okay, then what is it?" My daughter kept coloring. "That's where she looks from." I stopped smiling. "Where? Who looks from?" She shrugged. "The lady." I remember the strange feeling that moved over my arms. It wasn't really fear. Not yet. It was more like a sudden chill. The kind you get when you hear a noise somewhere in your house and know there should be nobody there. I turned down the heat on the stove and walked closer to her. "What lady?" My daughter reached for another crayon. "The lady in the house." "Have you seen her?" She nodded as if the answer was obvious. "Sometimes." "Where?" She looked at me. "When I sleep." For a second, I didn't know what to say. Then she added, "She watches me." I immediately called my wife into the kitchen. She came in holding her laptop, looking annoyed because I had interrupted whatever she was doing. "What's wrong?" I explained what our daughter had said. My wife looked at the drawing, then she laughed. "She probably saw something on TV. We don't really let her watch anything scary." Then she imagined it. She looked toward our daughter. Kids make up stories all the time. My daughter wasn't paying attention to us anymore. She had started drawing flowers around the house. My wife gave me a look that clearly meant I was overreacting. And honestly, she was probably right. Children say strange things. They invent imaginary friends. They mix dreams with reality. They hear words from adults and repeat them without understanding what they mean. That was what I told myself for the rest of the night. By bedtime, I had almost forgotten about it. Then she drew the house again the next day. I got home from work and found her sitting on the living room floor. There were crayons everywhere again. She had drawn another house. The moment I saw it, something inside me tightened. It was the same house, same square shape, same roof, same tree beside it, same upstairs window, and the same black figure was standing inside. Only this time, there was another stick figure beside it, a smaller one. I sat down beside her. "Who's this?" I pointed to the smaller figure. She looked at me like I was asking a stupid question. "That's me." My stomach tightened. "Why are you in there?" She stared down at the picture. "Because she wants me to come back." Something about those words bothered me more than anything she had said before. Come back. Not come visit. Not come inside. Come back. "Have you been there before?" My daughter shrugged. "I don't know." "Then why would she say come back?" "Oh, she just does." "Who is she?" "The lady." I tried to stay calm. "What does the lady look like?" My daughter thought for a moment. "Old." "How old?" "Very old." "Does she talk to you?" "Yes." "What does she say?" My daughter looked toward the hallway. For a second, she didn't answer. Then she whispered, "She says I shouldn't tell you everything." I felt my heart beat a little faster. That night, I barely slept. I knew how ridiculous the whole thing sounded. My 4-year-old daughter had invented a creepy woman who stood in a window. That was all. There was no reason to be afraid. Still, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black stick figure standing upstairs. What bothered me most was that my daughter wasn't scared. If she had woken up screaming and told me a monster was watching her, I probably would have been less worried. Children have nightmares. Children become frightened by shadows. But she wasn't frightened. She spoke about the lady like she knew her, like the lady was someone familiar, someone she trusted. A few weeks passed. The drawings continued. Not every day, but often enough that I noticed. Sometimes the figure was in the window. Sometimes it stood beside the house. Once my daughter drew the woman holding her hand. I threw that picture away after she went to bed. I didn't tell my wife. I knew what she would say. I was encouraging the whole thing by paying too much attention to it. Maybe she was right. Then we went to visit my parents. My parents still lived in the same neighborhood where I had spent most of my childhood. It was an older part of town, full of houses, built sometime in the 1950s. Most of them had been repaired and changed over the years, but the neighborhood still had the same feeling I remembered. Narrow driveways, large trees, old fences, quiet streets. My daughter loved going there because my parents had a big backyard. She spent most of the afternoon running around outside, drawing with chalk, collecting leaves, and playing with an old ball my father had found in the garage. Nothing strange happened. By dinner, I had almost convinced myself the whole thing with the drawings was fading away. Then my daughter came running inside, holding a piece of paper. "Daddy?" I looked at her drawing. My blood went cold. It was the house again. But this drawing was different. There were more details, far more details. She had drawn a porch with 3 steps. She had drawn a narrow driveway. She had drawn a large tree beside it. There was a cracked upstairs window. There was even a small mailbox leaning slightly toward the road. I stared at the paper. Then I slowly looked through my parents' front window. There was a house directly across the street. The drawing was identical to it. Not similar. Identical. My daughter had drawn every important detail. The porch, the tree, the damaged window, even the crooked mailbox. I stood up and walked outside. My daughter followed me. The house across the street looked abandoned. I had passed it hundreds of times when I was younger, but strangely, I couldn't remember ever paying attention to it. The windows were covered with old wooden boards. The grass was dead and overgrown. Paint was peeling from the walls. The front porch sagged slightly. The mailbox hung open. Nobody had lived there for years, maybe decades. I looked down at my daughter. "You know this house?" She nodded. "The lady lives there." I felt sick. "How do you know that?" "She told me." "When?" My daughter smiled. "When she visits?" I stared across the road. There was no movement behind the boarded windows, no sound, nothing. Still, I had this sudden, uncomfortable feeling that someone was standing inside, looking back at us. I took my daughter by the hand and brought her inside. Later that evening, when she was playing in another room, I asked my father about the house. He was sitting in his chair reading. "The house across the street," I said. "What's the story with it?" His expression changed immediately. It was small, but I noticed. His eyes moved toward the window. "What did you say?" "The abandoned house." He closed his book. "You shouldn't talk about that place." I laughed nervously. "Why?" He didn't answer. My mother entered from the kitchen. She looked at both of us, then at the window. She knew exactly what we were talking about. "Your father told you not to go near that house when you were little," she said. I frowned. "I don't remember that." My parents exchanged a look. That made me more uncomfortable. Why wasn't I allowed near it? My father rubbed his face. There was a family living there? I waited. They had a daughter. How old? He hesitated. About your age. Something inside me tightened. What happened to her? She disappeared. The room became very quiet. What do you mean disappeared? One day she was there. The next day she wasn't. Was she kidnapped? Nobody knows. Did they ever find her? My father shook his head. I looked toward the window again. My mother spoke softly. Her mother never recovered from it. What happened to her? My mother looked uncomfortable. For years, she would sit upstairs by the window. I felt cold. What window? Neither of them answered. They didn't need to, I already knew. The cracked upstairs window. My father stared down at his hands. She waited for her daughter to come home. For how long? Years. And then? My father didn't respond. I looked at my mother. She looked away. I understood. That night, I had trouble sleeping. My wife told me I was letting an old story get into my head. I told her about the house. I showed her our daughter's drawing. She admitted it was strange, but she still believed there had to be an explanation. Maybe our daughter had seen the house from the car earlier. Maybe she had been looking at it through the window before drawing it. Maybe my parents had mentioned the story around her without realizing it. All of those explanations sounded possible. I wanted desperately to believe one of them. The next morning, I woke early. The house was quiet. I went downstairs and found my daughter sitting at the kitchen table, drawing. My heart started beating faster the moment I saw the crayons. Sweetheart? She looked up. Daddy, she wants you to stop being scared. I froze. Who? The lady. I walked toward the table. The picture in front of her wasn't the abandoned house. At least I didn't think it was. It looked like our house. There was our front yard, our upstairs bedroom, our tree near the driveway. And inside the upstairs window was the black figure, the lady. But she wasn't alone. There was another figure beside her, a taller one. I pointed at it. Who's that? My daughter smiled. You. My hands started shaking. Why am I there? Because you're coming too. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the drawing. I crumpled it and threw it into the trash. My daughter immediately started crying. My wife came running into the kitchen. What happened? I tried to explain. Even while the words were leaving my mouth, I could hear how insane I sounded. I was angry because our 4-year-old had drawn me standing in a window. My wife looked frustrated. She's a child. I know. You're scaring her. I know, but you don't understand. What don't I understand? I pointed toward the trash. That house. The woman. Everything she keeps saying. My daughter slowly stopped crying. Then she looked toward the hallway. Her face changed. She smiled. She's here. My wife and I both turned. The hallway was empty. I felt my skin tighten. Who's here? My wife asked. My daughter kept looking into the hallway. The lady. My wife knelt beside her. There's nobody there. Yes, there is. Where? My daughter pointed. Right there. I saw nothing. Then my daughter laughed softly. She says, you finally remembered. I felt like someone had dropped ice down my back. I looked at her. What does that mean? My daughter turned toward me. She says you lived there before. I laughed. It was a nervous, forced sound. No, I didn't. My daughter frowned. Yes, you did. No, you did. She pointed toward the trash can. At the picture. I don't know why, but I reached down and picked it up. I unfolded the paper. The drawing was wrinkled. I stared at it. Then I noticed something I had somehow missed before. The house wasn't our current home. I had only assumed it was because of the shape. But the front steps were wrong. The windows were different. The trees stood in another position. There was an old wooden fence along one side. I knew that fence. My breathing became shallow. It wasn't my parents' current house either. It was another house. A house I hadn't thought about in years. My childhood home. The first house I remembered living in. The one my parents had sold when I was 6 years old. I had completely forgotten what it looked like. But now, staring at the drawing, memories started coming back. Not clearly. Not all at once. Pieces. A narrow backyard. A broken swing. A white fence. A small bedroom with blue walls. And a house next door. I looked at the upstairs window in the drawing. There was the black figure. But suddenly, in my mind, it wasn't a black figure anymore. It was a little girl. I remembered her. Not completely, but enough. She lived next door. We played together. Almost every day. I remembered sitting in the dirt with her. I remembered her laughing. I remembered chasing each other between the houses. I remembered my mother calling me inside and telling me not to go near the neighbor's home. Most of all, I remembered the girl talking about a secret room. She used to whisper about it. She said there was a place in her house nobody else knew about. A room behind a wall. A place where she hid things. One day, she promised she would show it to me. Then my memory stopped. I dropped the drawing. My daughter looked up. "Daddy?" My voice barely worked. "What?" She smiled. "She says she's glad you're coming back." I didn't answer. My wife asked what was wrong, but I couldn't explain it. Not yet. The memories felt too fragile, too strange. I spent the rest of that day distracted. Every few minutes, another small image came back to me. The little girl standing at the fence. The little girl waving from a window. Her whispering my name. My parents pulling me away from the house. Then nothing. A blank space. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I went through old family boxes. My parents kept dozens of photo albums in a closet. I sat on the floor and opened them one by one. Birthdays, Christmas, school pictures, vacations. Most of the photographs felt familiar. Then I found an album from when I was around 5 years old. I turned the pages slowly. There was our old house, the one from the drawing. My hand began shaking. I stared at pictures of the backyard, the fence, the upstairs windows. Everything my daughter had drawn was there. I kept turning pages. Then I found a photograph that made me stop. I was standing in the backyard. I looked about 5 years old. I was smiling at the camera. Beside me stood a little girl. She looked around the same age, dark hair, a pale dress. One hand was holding mine. I stared at her face. I knew her, but I didn't know her name. The feeling was horrible. It was like seeing someone from a dream you had forgotten years ago. My mind recognized her before my memory did. I turned the photo over. There was writing on the back, my mother's handwriting. 4 words. "Do not remember her." I read the sentence again, then again. My hands became numb. Why would my mother write that? Why would she keep the photograph? Why had my parents told me the girl was imaginary? I stood up and walked toward their bedroom. I almost woke them. Then I stopped. Something in me didn't want to ask. I was afraid of what they might say. Instead, I went back downstairs and looked through more photos. Most showed only me. A few had strange empty spaces where someone seemed to have been cropped out. In one picture, I stood near the old fence, smiling toward someone outside the frame. In another, I was sitting on the porch with 2 cups beside me, even though I appeared to be alone. Then I found another photo. The girl was standing in the upstairs window of the house next door. Behind her stood a woman, her mother. The woman's face was hard to see because of the reflection on the glass, but the position was exactly the same as the figure my daughter kept drawing. I heard a noise behind me. I turned quickly. My daughter stood at the bottom of the stairs. She was holding a crayon. "What are you doing awake?" She didn't answer. She walked toward me. Her eyes moved toward the photo. "That's her," I swallowed. "The lady?" My daughter shook her head. "The little girl." I looked at the photograph. "You know her?" She nodded. "What's her name?" My daughter whispered something. I didn't hear it. "What?" She said the name again. And the moment I heard it, my head exploded with memories. Her name, her laugh, her voice, the secret room, a dark hallway, her holding my hand, telling me not to make noise, the smell of dust, the sound of someone crying behind a wall. Then my mother screaming my name. I grabbed the edge of the table. My daughter watched me quietly. More memories came. The girl leading me into her house. We weren't supposed to be there. Her mother was upstairs. I remembered hearing her walking around. The little girl pulled open a narrow door hidden behind a cabinet. Behind it was a dark space. She told me that was her secret room. She said nobody could find us there. Then something happened. I still couldn't remember what. My daughter touched my arm. "She waited for you." I looked down. "Who?" "The girl." My mouth went dry. "For what?" "To come back." I looked at the old photograph. The little girl smiled at me from decades ago. "Why?" My daughter's expression became sad. "Because you left her." A sudden memory hit me so hard I nearly fell. The secret room, the door closing, darkness, the little girl crying, me pounding on something. Then my father carrying me outside, my mother screaming, police cars, someone asking me questions. My parents telling me over and over that there was no girl, that I had been alone, that I had made her up, that I needed to forget. I looked at my daughter. "What happened to her?" She looked toward the hallway again. This time her smile was gone. She stayed. I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. The missing girl hadn't simply disappeared. Somewhere inside that old house, there had been a secret room. A room nobody knew about. A room I had forgotten. Maybe nobody had ever searched it. Maybe nobody had known where to look. And for years, her mother had sat at the upstairs window, waiting for a daughter who had never really left the house. My daughter picked up the old photograph. The lady was waiting too. I stared at her. "For her daughter?" She nodded. "Now she isn't waiting anymore." I felt sick. "Why?" My daughter looked at me. "Because she found me." I grabbed her shoulders. "No." She didn't seem frightened. "She says I look like her." "No." "She says you can fix it." I shook my head. "We're leaving." My daughter smiled. "You already did that once." The room felt suddenly colder. I woke my wife. I told her we were going home immediately. She argued at first, but something in my face must have convinced her. We packed our things. I didn't tell my parents what I had remembered. I didn't ask them about the photograph. I was too angry, too scared, too confused. We drove away before sunrise. My daughter slept in the back seat, and for most of the drive, I kept looking at her in the mirror. She looked peaceful, normal. When we finally reached our house, I carried her upstairs and put her in bed. Then I sat beside her for almost an hour. Nothing happened. No voices, no drawings, no lady. For a few days, I started hoping it was over. Then I found a picture beneath my daughter's pillow. The old house, the secret room, the little girl, my daughter, and me, all standing together. At the bottom, my daughter had written something in uneven letters. Daddy remembers now. I didn't throw that one away. I kept it, because I'm afraid that if I forget again, something worse will happen. Since then, more memories have returned. I remember the girl telling me her mother had shown her the hidden room. I remember her saying she sometimes heard scratching behind the walls. I remember promising I would never leave her. I remember breaking that promise. And sometimes, late at night, I hear my daughter talking quietly in her bedroom. When I ask who she is speaking to, she always gives me the same answer. The lady. Last week, I finally asked my mother about the photograph. She started crying before I finished the question. She told me the truth. The little girl had been real. Her name had been removed from everything in my childhood after she vanished because I became obsessed with her disappearance. I stopped sleeping. I kept telling people she was trapped inside the house. I insisted there was a secret room. The police searched the house more than once. They found nothing. Eventually, my parents moved us away. A therapist told them that constantly talking about the girl might be making my condition worse. So they stopped. They removed pictures. They avoided her name. They told me she had been imaginary. Eventually, I forgot. I asked my mother why she wrote those words on the photograph. Do not remember her. She said she wrote them to herself. A reminder never to show it to me. A reminder never to let me fall back into the obsession. Then I asked the question I was afraid to ask. Did they ever find the secret room? My mother went quiet. Finally, she said no. The house across from my parents isn't the house where the girl disappeared. That was the part I had misunderstood. The abandoned house belonged to the girl's mother after the disappearance. She moved there years later. She sat by the upstairs window every day until she died. The original house, the one where the girl and I played, was sold. And according to my mother, it was demolished years ago. At least, that is what everyone believed. But 2 nights ago, my daughter drew another picture. This time, it wasn't the house from my childhood. It was the abandoned house across from my parents, the mother's house. She drew the upstairs window. She drew the black figure. Then she drew a door behind the figure. A tiny door hidden in the wall. I asked her what it was. She smiled. The secret room. I told her that house didn't have one. She looked at me strangely. Yes, it does. How do you know? The girl showed me. My hands went cold. What girl? She stared at me. The one you left behind. Then she looked past me toward the hallway. Her face brightened. She says you have to come back now. I haven't told my wife yet. I don't know what to tell her. I don't know if any of this is real. Maybe my daughter somehow heard parts of the story. Maybe my parents told her something. Maybe my memories are being affected by fear. Maybe that photograph simply opened wounds that should have stayed closed. But there is one thing I cannot explain. I checked the drawing again this morning. The hidden door my daughter drew in the abandoned house is in exactly the same place as the secret room I remember from childhood. The same wall, the same narrow shape, the same little handle, and beneath the door she drew 2 small black lines. Feet. Someone is standing on the other side, waiting. My daughter says the lady watches from the window. She says the little girl waits behind the wall. And every night now, just before she falls asleep, she asks me the same question. Daddy, when are we going back? I always tell her never. She always smiles. Then she gives me the same answer. You said that last time, too. Story 3. I don't talk about this very often. My name is Jason, and even now, years later, I still have trouble telling the whole story without feeling like I am back there again. My wife knows a shorter version. A few friends from high school know that something happened to me out on my father's farm when I was 15. But I have never sat down and told anyone everything from beginning to end. I have not even told my dad the full version. That might sound strange because he was there for the worst part of it. In some ways, he probably knows more than I do. But there are things we never discussed after that night. And there are questions I stopped asking because I could tell from his face that he did not want to answer them. I grew up on a corn and soybean farm about 40 minutes outside Cedar Falls, Iowa. Our place sat along a county road so small and poorly marked that GPS had trouble finding it, even years later. When delivery drivers came out, they usually called from somewhere miles away because their maps had sent them to the wrong road. There was not much around us. Our nearest neighbors, the Hendricksons, lived almost 3 miles away. Beyond that, there were fields, drainage ditches, scattered trees, barns, gravel roads, and long stretches of open land. At night, especially in late summer and early fall, it could feel like we were the only people left in Iowa. My mother died from ovarian cancer when I was 12. After that, it was just my dad and me in the farmhouse. He worked the land from morning until dark. I went to school, helped when I could, and tried to keep life moving forward. My dad was not the kind of man who talked much about grief. He dealt with things by working harder. If he was hurting, he carried it quietly. During football season, I usually rode my bike to practice because he was still working in the fields when I needed to leave. Practice ended after sunset most nights, so I often rode the 2 miles home in complete darkness. I am telling you this because I want you to understand something. Being outside alone at night was normal for me. I had walked those fields in darkness. I had ridden my bike down that empty county road dozens of times with nothing except a small light on the handlebars. I had gone out to shut barn doors after midnight. I had checked fences by myself when coyotes were calling nearby. None of it scared me. My father had never once told me I was not allowed outside after dark. Until one night in September of my sophomore year. I remember it was late September because we had already finished the second cutting of hay, but the soybeans were still green. Harvest had not started yet. The days were getting shorter, but the evenings could still be warm and humid. I got home from football practice a little after 8. I rode my bike up the gravel driveway, put it in the shed like I always did, and walked into the house. My dad was standing in the kitchen. That was unusual by itself. Normally, he would either be sitting at the table eating, or coming in behind me covered in dirt and smelling like diesel and sweat. But that night, he was just standing in the middle of the kitchen. He was not cooking. He was not cleaning. He was not reading anything. He was simply standing there. I remember asking if something was wrong. He looked at me for a second, then said, "Don't go outside tonight." I thought I had misunderstood him. "What?" "Don't go outside tonight," he repeated. "Not even to the shed. Not even for your bike." "I mean it." I asked him why. He looked toward the dark kitchen window. "Just don't." There was something about his voice that stopped me from asking again. He was not angry. That would have been easier. His voice was flat and heavy, like he was trying very hard not to show what he was actually feeling. My dad was not a nervous man. He had spent his entire life farming. He had dealt with bad weather, machinery accidents, livestock problems, coyotes, flooding, tornado warnings, crop failures, injuries, and my mother's death. I had seen him angry. I had seen him exhausted. I had seen him heartbroken. I had almost never seen him afraid. That night, I think I did. So I listened, at least at first. I ate dinner, did my homework, watched a little television, and went to bed. Around 11, I woke up thirsty. I went to the kitchen for water, then returned to my room. My bedroom was on the back side of the house, facing the fields. We had 4 sodium floodlights mounted on tall poles around the property. They were old lights that buzzed faintly and gave off a dirty orange-yellow glow. My dad kept them on at night. Part of the reason was deer. They were always getting too close to certain areas. But that summer, he had also been dealing with something getting into one of the grain bins. He never figured out what it was. At first, he thought raccoons, then maybe a large dog. He found scratches on the side of one bin that did not make much sense, and twice he discovered grain scattered around in a way that looked like someone had dragged handfuls of it across the ground. He stopped talking about it after a while. I did not connect that with what happened later until years afterward. That night, I stood beside my bedroom window drinking water. I looked outside without really thinking about it. That was when I saw someone standing in the soybean field. The figure was probably 400 yards away. It stood beyond the second floodlight, in one of those places where the orange light barely reached. Most of the field was completely black, but there was a patch between the shadows where enough light touched the ground to make out the rows of beans. The person was standing directly in the middle of that patch, not walking, not bending down, not looking around, just standing there. At first, I thought it might be my imagination. I leaned closer to the window. The figure did not move. At that distance, under sodium lights, colors are strange. Everything looks yellow, brown, orange, or black. But something about the figure still seemed wrong. Parts of it looked dark red, not bright red, more like rust. It looked as if mud or something darker had dried across its clothes and skin. I remember trying to create normal explanations. Maybe it was someone wearing stained work coveralls. That would not have been unusual in farm country. Maybe it was one of the Hendrickson boys. Maybe a hunter had crossed onto our property. People did that sometimes, even though my dad had posted signs telling them not to. I watched for about a minute. The figure did not move. Then, very slowly, it raised one arm. It waved at me. It was not a normal wave. There was no energy in it. The arm lifted. The hand opened. Then the hand moved inward once, like someone calling a child closer. Come here. After that, the arm dropped. The figure stood still again. It did not shout. It did not step closer. It simply waited. I wish I could say I immediately woke my father. I didn't. I was 15. 15-year-old boys do stupid things because we think fear is something we're supposed to defeat instead of listen to. I told myself that maybe the person needed help. Maybe someone's truck had broken down on the road. Maybe someone had gotten hurt. I did not let myself think about why a person needing help would stand silently in the middle of our bean field at 11 at night. I put on my shoes. Then I quietly opened the back door. I did not use the front door because the screen door there made more noise. Looking back, that detail bothers me. Some part of me knew I was doing something my father had specifically warned me not to do, but I still did it carefully enough to avoid waking him. Outside, the air was warm and thick. Late September in Iowa can still feel like summer after sunset. Crickets were loud around the house. Somewhere far off in the direction of the Hendricksons' place, a dog barked once, then again, then stopped. I started walking. The first 100 yards felt normal. I passed the shed, then the old grain bin. The floodlight above it buzzed and flickered slightly. Once I went beyond the grain bin, the ground dipped. That was where the main field began. The moment I stepped down among the soybean rows, I started sweating. It had nothing to do with the heat. I remember wiping my forehead with the sleeve of my shirt and thinking that was strange. The soybean plants were only around knee height, so I could easily see above them, but the sound changed once I was surrounded by the rows. From near the farmhouse, wind moving across a bean field just sounds like a soft, rushing noise. Inside the field, it is different. Every plant rubs against another, leaves scrape, stalks knock together. A gust of wind can sound exactly like someone running through the rows beside you. That night, I kept hearing movement, rustling to my left. Then another sound on my right, then behind me. I would stop. The sound would stop too. Then the wind would move again. I told myself it was rabbits. We had plenty of rabbits. I still tell myself that. But I remember one sound very clearly. Something moved through 3 or 4 rows to my left. Then, almost immediately, I heard the same sound several rows to my right, too quickly, as if whatever had been beside me had crossed behind me without making any sound in the middle. I turned around. The farmhouse lights were still visible. I almost went back. Then I looked toward the orange patch where the figure had been. It was still there, or I thought it was. I could see something dark. I kept walking. After a while, the land dipped lower. For maybe 30 seconds, I lost sight of the floodlight. When I came back up the other side, I stopped. I could not find the figure anymore. Worse than that, I could not immediately tell where I was. The 4 floodlights around our property all looked almost identical from out there. Each one threw the same dirty orange glow across the field. For several seconds, I genuinely did not know which direction the farmhouse was. That had never happened to me. I had grown up on that land. I knew every ditch, fence line, and slope. I could have crossed half of it with my eyes closed. But suddenly, everything felt unfamiliar. I stood there trying to orient myself. One light looked closer, another looked farther away. The rows seemed to run at slightly wrong angles. I should have turned around. Instead, I kept moving forward. I cannot fully explain why. It did not feel like a decision. My legs just kept walking. That is the part I struggle to describe. My mind knew something was wrong. My body did not seem interested. It felt like when you are extremely tired and driving somewhere familiar, then suddenly realize you have gone several miles without remembering the road. Except I was awake. I was walking, and I knew I should stop. Still, I continued. Then, almost without realizing it, I reached the place where the figure had been standing. There was nobody there, only flattened plants. The soybean stalks formed a rough circle. The plants inside it had been pushed down almost perfectly. At first, I thought maybe deer had bedded there. But deer flatten plants differently. They step on them. They crush some, leave others standing. This looked deliberate. The stalks around the edge were bent at similar heights. Some were snapped. Others looked as though someone had pressed them down one at a time by hand. The dirt in the middle was dark. I stared at it. That was when my vision started changing. The edges of everything became soft. Not blurry exactly. more like I was slipping into sleep while still standing. The floodlights seemed farther away. The buzzing sound became quieter. Even the crickets faded. I remember thinking, I should be terrified, but I was not. That frightened me more than anything. It was like something had turned down the part of my brain that knew how to panic. I felt calm. Too calm. Then a hand grabbed my shoulder, hard. It pulled me backward. I spun around. My dad was standing behind me. His flashlight beam hit me directly in the face. The instant I saw him, everything changed. It felt like waking from a dream. The sounds rushed back. Crickets, wind, beans rubbing against each other. My own breathing. My heart started pounding so hard it hurt. My dad did not yell. That scared me more than yelling would have. He grabbed my hand. He squeezed it hard enough that my fingers hurt. My father had never grabbed me like that before. Not even when I was little. Not even if I had done something dangerous. He looked at me and said quietly, I told you not to come out here. I started apologizing. Then I looked back toward the flattened circle. That was when I noticed the stone. It sat directly in the center. I had not seen it before. It was about the size of a large fist. Smooth. Almost polished. It looked like something that belonged in the bottom of a river. But there was no river near our field. Never had been. The stone was dark red. At first, I thought the color was natural. Then I noticed the dirt around it. The soil closest to the stone was red too. It looked wet. Not soaked. Just stained. As if the color had leaked out from the rock. Without thinking, I bent down. I reached for it. My dad yanked my arm backward so violently that I nearly fell. No. It was the first time his voice became sharp. I stared at him. What is it? He did not answer. He just started walking toward the house. Fast. He still held my wrist. I had to almost jog to keep up. He did not look left. He did not look right. Most importantly, he never looked behind us. I did. Several times. I kept feeling like something was following. Not close enough to see clearly. Just movement in the rows. A dark shape disappearing whenever I turned. Sometimes I heard the beans rustle behind us. My dad walked faster every time it happened. That is why I believe he heard it too. We did not slow down until we reached the farmhouse. He pushed me through the back door. Then he came inside and immediately locked it. Not just the handle, the deadbolt too. He checked the window, then the other windows, then the front door. I stood in the kitchen trying to catch my breath. What was that? I asked. He ignored me. Dad. He looked at me. His face looked older than it had earlier that evening. I told you not to go outside. I know. I'm sorry. But what was that? He shook his head. Go to bed. I asked again. No answer. He was not angry. I could hear fear in his voice. Not fear for himself. Fear because of what had almost happened to me. That night, neither of us slept. I went to my room, but I stayed awake. Around 2 a.m, I heard him moving around in the kitchen. Around 4, I heard him again. My dad was usually the kind of person who could fall asleep anywhere after a long day in the fields. Even during the week my mother died, I do not remember hearing him walk around all night like that. The next morning, I left for the school bus. Mr. Hendrickson was standing near the end of our driveway. That was unusual. He did not say hello. He looked at me and asked, "What was all that screaming last night?" I remember staring at him. "What screaming?" "From your place." I told him it was probably an animal. His face changed slightly. He did not believe me. Neither did I. I had not heard screaming. My dad had not screamed. I had not screamed. At least, not that I remembered. Mr. Hendrickson looked toward our house, then toward the field. He said nothing else. A few days passed. Maybe 3. I'm not completely sure anymore. One morning, I woke earlier than usual. I heard voices outside. My dad was near the gate talking to a man I did not recognize. I stayed near the door and listened. My dad was telling him he wanted to sell the property. All of it. The house, the fields, the barns, everything. The second I stepped outside, my dad stopped talking. The other man looked at me. My dad told him they would finish the conversation later. I asked what was going on after the man left. At first, my dad became irritated. You shouldn't listen to other people's conversations. Later that afternoon, he came into the garage while I was working on my bike. He stood there quietly for a while. Then he said we could not keep running the farm alone forever. He told me the work was getting harder. He said maybe we could sell the land, move into Cedar Falls, and find something easier. Maybe he would open a small repair shop. Maybe I could finish school closer to town. His explanation made sense, but it did not feel true, at least not all of it. There was another reason underneath. I think I already knew what it was. He wanted to get me away from that place. Maybe he wanted to get himself away, too. We moved before the end of the year. The farm sold faster than I expected. I asked my dad once who bought it. He said some company. Years later, I tried looking it up. The property records changed several times. The original farmhouse is gone now. Most satellite images show only fields. I have never driven back there. I have thought about it. I probably could. I know the road. I remember every turn. But every time I seriously consider going back, I remember that red stone sitting in the flattened soybean plants. And I decide not to. My dad is 65 now. He lives a quiet life. He has slowed down a lot. For a while, when I was in my 20s, I tried asking him about that night. The first time, he said he did not remember much. The second time, he changed the subject. The third time, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "Some things are better left where they happen." That was the closest he ever came to admitting anything. After that, I stopped asking. But I know he remembers. I know because once, several years ago, we were driving through Illinois on a family trip. We passed a field at dusk. There was someone standing near the edge, probably just a farmer, maybe a scarecrow. I do not know. My dad saw it through the passenger window. He immediately looked away, his hands clenched around his knees. For the next 20 minutes, he said nothing. That reaction told me everything I needed to know. I still think about the figure from our field. I think about how it waved, slowly, patiently, like it knew I would come. I wonder whether my dad had seen it before I got home from football practice. Maybe that was why he was standing in the kitchen. Maybe he had already been watching it through the window. Maybe he had seen the stone. Maybe he knew more about it than he ever told me. Sometimes I wonder if the thing that had been getting into our grain bins that summer was connected. I wonder if that was the beginning. I wonder about Mr. Hendrickson hearing screams neither my father nor I remembered making. That detail bothers me more now than it did when I was 15. Where did the screaming come from? Was someone else out there? Was it me? Did something happen during those minutes when my vision became soft and my thoughts slowed down? There are pieces of that walk I cannot clearly remember. I remember leaving the house. I remember passing the grain bin. I remember entering the beans. Then there are moments that feel stretched, empty, like parts of the night were removed. The strangest part is the distance. The figure was around 400 yards from the house. That is not far. I should have reached it quickly. But thinking back, I feel like I walked for much longer than I should have. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. I cannot be certain. My father somehow reached me before I picked up the stone. How did he know exactly where I was? I never asked him that. I should have. Did he see me leave? Did he follow my footprints? Or did he already know where I would go? I wonder what would have happened if I had touched that stone. That question has followed me longer than any other. Would I have just picked it up and realized it was an ordinary rock? Would something have happened immediately? Would I have walked farther into the field? Would my father have found me standing there the next morning? Or would he not have found me at all? Sometimes I dream about it. In the dream, I am 15 again. I am standing in the flattened circle. The field is silent. The red stone is lying at my feet. My dad is not behind me. The farmhouse lights are gone. I cannot remember which direction home is. The figure is standing on the other side of the circle now, closer than it ever was that night. I still cannot see its face. It lifts one hand. It points at the stone. Then it points at me. I always wake up before I touch it. My wife says I sometimes get out of bed during those dreams. Once she found me standing beside our bedroom window at 3 in the morning. I was looking across our backyard. When she asked what I was doing, apparently I told her, "It's waiting in the light." I do not remember saying that. We live in the suburbs now. There are houses on every side of us, street lights, cars, neighbors. Nothing like the farm. But I still hate sodium lights, those old orange ones. Whenever I see one shining across an empty parking lot or a field, I automatically search the edge of the light. I look for someone standing there, waiting. I have never seen the figure again. At least, I do not think I have. But every now and then, especially in September when the air is still warm after dark and the fields outside town are beginning to change, I remember the way my father grabbed my hand. I remember how hard he squeezed. I remember the look on his face. Not anger, not confusion. Recognition. That is what I think it was. Recognition. Like he knew exactly what was happening to me because something similar had happened before. Maybe to him. Maybe to someone else in our family. I will probably never know. My dad has spent most of his life refusing to talk about it. And I have finally accepted that I may never get the answers I want. Maybe that is for the best. Still, some nights I lie awake thinking about those 30 seconds. If my father had stayed asleep just a little longer, I would have touched the stone. I know I would have. I remember wanting it. That is the part that scares me most. I did not simply reach for it because I was curious. In that moment, it felt important. It felt familiar. Like the stone belonged to me and had been waiting a very long time for me to come get it. And even now, after all these years, part of me sometimes wonders whether it is still out there in that field, waiting beneath the dirt, waiting under that same orange light, waiting for me to come back and finish what I started. Story 4. "That's a big one," I said, pointing toward a brightly colored starfish resting in a shallow tide pool. My son immediately leaned forward, his eyes growing wide with excitement. The starfish was beautiful. Its body was covered in bright shades of red, orange, and purple, and the wet sunlight made the colors look even stronger. It honestly looked less like an animal and more like something an artist had carefully painted and placed among the rocks. My son crouched beside it. At 3 years old, he was curious about almost everything. But the ocean had always fascinated him more than anything else. He could spend hours looking through picture books about whales, sharks, crabs, and deep-sea creatures. He knew the names of more sea animals than I did. For months, he had been asking me to take him to the tide pools. Every time I promised we would go, something came up. Work, bills, family responsibilities. My schedule was never kind to me, and getting even 2 days away from my job felt almost impossible. Eventually, after weeks of begging my supervisor and trading shifts with 2 coworkers, I managed to get a few days off. My wife couldn't come with us because she had a work conference that weekend. She felt bad about missing the trip, but I told her not to worry. It would be a father-son adventure. My boy had nearly exploded with excitement when I told him. We packed a small suitcase, snacks, extra clothes, a first aid kit, and far too many plastic beach toys, then made the 3-hour drive to the coast. By the time we arrived, he had asked, "Are we there yet?" At least 15 times. We checked into a small hotel not far from the shore. The beach itself was only a short drive away, but getting from the parking lot to the sand required a long hike down a narrow trail carved into the coastal hill. My son didn't mind. He ran ahead whenever I let him, stopping every few feet to point out a bird, a strange plant, or some interesting rock. When we finally reached the beach, the air smelled strongly of salt and seaweed. Waves crashed against the rocks with a low, repeating boom, while gulls screamed overhead. The tide was low. Dozens of dark pools had formed between the rocks, each one full of tiny creatures left behind by the retreating water. My son stood still for a moment, taking it all in. Then he shouted, "Come on, Dad!" And our adventure began. We carefully moved from pool to pool. We found small crabs hiding beneath stones. Tiny fish darted through clear water. Anemones closed whenever my son moved too close. Every discovery felt important to him. That made it important to me, too. Eventually, we found the brightly colored starfish. "It's so slimy," my son said, laughing as he gently touched one of its arms. I smiled. "Pretty cool, huh?" He nodded. Then a rough voice came from behind us. "You shouldn't touch the starfish." My son jumped slightly. I turned around. An old man stood several yards away. He looked exactly like the kind of fisherman you might see in an old children's book. He wore a yellow raincoat, even though the weather was clear. Heavy black boots covered his feet. A dark blue knitted cap sat low on his head. A wooden pipe hung from one side of his mouth. His face was deeply lined from age, wind, and sun, and a gray beard covered his jaw. But it was his eyes that made me uncomfortable. They were fixed directly on us, not curious, not friendly, angry. "Excuse me?" I asked. The old man removed the pipe from his mouth. "It'll curse you," he said. I frowned. "What will?" "The starfish." My son slowly pulled his hand back. The fisherman stared at the animal. "Touch them, and the sea remembers." For a second, I didn't know what to say. My first thought was that there must be some local rule against touching wildlife. Maybe I had missed a sign somewhere. I felt slightly embarrassed. "I'm sorry," I said. "We didn't realize. We'll keep our hands to ourselves." The man continued staring at us. Then he nodded once. "Good." He placed the pipe back between his lips and continued walking down the beach. My son watched him go. As soon as the fisherman was far enough away, my boy whispered, "Who was that?" "No idea." Was he telling the truth? "About what?" "The curse," I laughed. "No, So we can touch the starfish? I looked toward the old fisherman. He was walking slowly between the rocks. Oh, we're definitely touching the starfish. My son smiled. We just need to wait for Mr. Nosy to get out of our business. It took about 10 minutes before the fisherman disappeared around a rocky section of the coastline. Once I was sure he was gone, we continued exploring. I know now that this was the exact moment I should have listened. But at the time, the old man had seemed ridiculous, a strange local trying to scare tourists. Nothing more. My son found a large group of mussels attached to one of the darker rocks. Look, I said. He leaned closer. They looked like tombstones. I stared at them. He was right. Hundreds of black shells were packed tightly together, standing upright like tiny grave markers. Yeah, I said slowly. They kind of do. Something about that thought made me uncomfortable. But my son had already moved on. For the next hour, we explored nearly every tide pool we could reach. Whenever we found a starfish, my son wanted to touch it. Red ones, orange ones, purple ones, small ones hidden between rocks, large ones slowly moving across the wet stone. I took pictures, dozens of them. My son kneeling beside pools, my son holding up shells, my son pointing excitedly at small crabs. I wanted photos we could show my wife when she returned. Eventually, we found what looked like the best spot on the entire beach. A huge rock rose from the shallow water. Waves surrounded its lower half, but the upper section remained exposed. One side was completely covered with starfish. There had to be 50 of them, maybe more. My son gasped, "Dad, I see them." We carefully climbed closer. The starfish were packed together in different sizes and colors. Some were almost completely underwater. Others clung to the rock just above the surface. My son reached toward one. Then a voice suddenly boomed across the beach. "I told you not to touch them." I nearly slipped. I turned toward the ocean. The old fisherman was standing on a rock about 10 feet from shore. That alone was strange. The water surrounding him looked chest deep. I couldn't understand how he had gotten there without swimming. His clothes didn't even look wet. He stood perfectly still with his pipe in one hand. I felt irritation rise inside me. "Listen," I shouted back, trying not to sound too rude. "We're just exploring the tide pools." The fisherman frowned. "We're not hurting anything," I added. "You think you're so smart." His voice somehow carried clearly over the waves. "Just last month, a boy was dragged into the murky depths." My son moved closer to me. The old man pointed toward the starfish. "The ocean does not take kindly to travelers harassing its sea stars." That was the moment I decided the man was completely insane. I didn't want him frightening my son anymore. "Fine," I shouted. "We won't touch any more." I turned to my boy. "Come on, let's go." His face dropped. "Do we have to?" "Yeah." "But we just got here." "We've been here for hours." He looked disappointed. I sighed. "We'll get lunch, okay? Maybe we can come back later." "Promise?" "Promise." He followed me toward the trail. We walked across the wet sand and began heading back toward the path that led to the parking lot. The fisherman remained out on the water. I tried not to look at him. We were almost at the bottom of the trail when my son suddenly stopped. "Dad!" "What?" "Look." He pointed toward a nearby rock. "There's a giant one." I followed his finger, and there it was. Even after everything that happened later, I still remember exactly how it looked. It was the biggest starfish I had ever seen. It was almost the width of a basketball. Its body was a pale, translucent yellow, so light passed through parts of its limbs. You could almost see dark shapes moving inside it. It was crawling across a half-submerged rock faster than any starfish I had seen that day. Most sea stars moved so slowly you could barely tell they were alive. This one moved, not quickly like a crab, but quickly enough that you could actually watch each arm shift across the stone. My son stared in amazement. Can I touch it? I hesitated. The fisherman's warning returned to my mind. Don't touch the starfish. For some reason, the words sounded more serious now. The creature pulsed. Its yellow body seemed to expand and contract slightly. It was moving toward a dark crack in the rock, almost as if it were trying to hide. For one strange second, I thought it knew we were watching. Then I shook the feeling away. It was a starfish, nothing more. I smiled at my son. Sure, why not? He crouched beside it. I watched as he reached out. His fingers touched one of the creature's thick yellow arms. The surface looked wet and rubbery. My son laughed. Then he slowly ran his fingers along the arm. The starfish stopped moving. Completely. I noticed that. Before I could think about it, a scream ripped across the beach. It was loud enough to make both of us jump. I turned toward the sound. A middle-aged woman and a teenage girl were running along the shoreline. The girl looked terrified. The woman kept looking behind her. For a moment, I assumed someone had been injured. Maybe a dog had attacked them. Then my son grabbed my hand. Daddy? What is that? The woman and the girl were running from something. At first, I thought it was a person wearing diving equipment. A black shape dragged itself through the shallow water. It moved awkwardly, like someone walking in an oversized wetsuit. Then it stood upright. My stomach dropped. It wasn't human. Seaweed covered most of its body. Barnacles clung to its shoulders and arms. Its skin looked greenish-gray and wet. A thick, slimy tail extended from its lower back, dragging behind it through the water. When it stepped onto the sand, I realized it was almost 6 feet tall. The teenage girl screamed again. The creature moved after them, not walking, running. I warned you! The fisherman's voice echoed over the waves. I turned toward him. He was still standing on the distant rock. He pointed directly at us. Now the sea sprites will come. I stared at him. Sea sprites? My son screamed. Watch out, Daddy! I turned just in time. Another creature was charging toward us. It had crawled out from between 2 rocks. This one looked even worse. Its body seemed to be made from pieces of different sea creatures. Thick strands of kelp hung from its shoulders. Barnacles covered its chest. Black sea urchins grew from one arm like tumors. Its face resembled a crab. 2 dark eyes rested on long stalks. Its mouth opened sideways. The torso beneath all of that was purple, exactly like the starfish we had been touching, and it was moving fast. Get to the trail, I shouted. I shoved my son behind me. My eyes searched the ground. There was a long piece of driftwood nearby. I grabbed it. The creature was already almost on top of me. I raised the wood. Then something struck my face. I didn't even see the attack. Wet heat poured down the side of my cheek. I stumbled backward. My hand went to my face. Blood. A lot of it. The creature had cut me, but I had no idea how. It was too fast. Daddy! My son's voice pulled me back. He was standing several feet behind me, frozen with fear. The creature raised one arm. At the end of it was a large, serrated claw. I swung the driftwood with both hands. Get away from him! The wood connected with its leg. Crack. A section of the creature's brittle outer shell broke apart. It stumbled sideways, thick yellow liquid poured from the wound. The smell hit me immediately. Rotten fish. Salt. something sweet and sickening. The creature made a clicking sound, not a scream, a rapid, angry clattering. I looked toward the beach. The woman and her daughter were still running. The first creature was gaining on them. "Help!" the woman screamed. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But my son was behind me, and the creature in front of me wasn't finished. "Dad!" I looked back. It had regained its balance. The crab-faced thing charged again. Its claw opened. I lifted the driftwood. This time, I swung directly at its head. Crunch. The sound was horrible. The creature's head broke free from its body. For a second, it remained in the air. Then it hit one of the stone steps leading toward the trail. It bounced once, twice, then rolled onto the sand below. The body remained standing for half a second, then collapsed. Yellow fluid spread around it. I stood there breathing hard, still holding the broken driftwood. My son stared at the dead thing. "Is it dead?" I couldn't answer. Then I looked toward the ocean, and everything inside me went cold. Dozens of shapes were emerging from the water. Some crawled, some walked upright. Some dragged themselves across the sand using long, twisted arms. Each one looked different. One had a body covered completely in mussel shells. Another moved on what looked like crab legs. Several had starfish-like limbs stretching from their backs. They poured from the waves. Not 5, not 10, dozens, maybe more. The fisherman was still standing on his rock. He pointed toward us. The woman and her daughter were gone. I don't know what happened to them. I never saw them again. "Run!" I grabbed my son's hand. We ran up the trail. I had never moved that fast in my life. My face was bleeding. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they were going to collapse. But fear kept me moving. Behind us, I could hear wet footsteps, scraping, clicking, something crashing against rocks. My son was crying. "Don't look back," I shouted. I didn't look back either. We reached the top of the trail. The parking lot had never looked so beautiful. Our car was about 50 yards away. I scooped my son into my arms and ran. My keys slipped from my hand when I reached the driver's door. No. I dropped to my knees. My hands shook badly. I found the keys beneath the car and unlocked it. I pushed my son inside, jumped behind the wheel, and started the engine. Something moved near the trail. A dark shape climbed over the railing. I hit the gas. The tires screamed. We sped out of the parking lot. I never looked in the mirror. I drove directly to an urgent care clinic. By the time we arrived, the bleeding had slowed. The doctor who examined my face asked what had happened. I told him I slipped on wet rocks. He seemed skeptical. The wounds were too clean. 3 long cuts crossed my cheek. But he didn't question me much. He cleaned the wound and gave me stitches. I didn't tell him about the creatures. What would I have said? A crab monster attacked me because my 3-year-old touched a giant starfish. They would have thought I was insane. Maybe they would have called the police. Maybe they would have called Child Protective Services. I stayed quiet. My son barely spoke during the drive home. The whole experience had exhausted him. He fell asleep in the back seat before we had driven even 30 minutes. I kept glancing at him through the mirror. Every time I felt guilty. I was supposed to protect him. Instead, I had ignored a warning because I didn't want some strange old man telling me what to do. By the time we reached home, it was early evening. My wife wouldn't be back until the following night. That gave me one day to figure out how I was going to explain the stitches on my face and why we had returned from our trip early. I gave my son a bath. I checked his entire body for cuts. There weren't any. thank God. I put him in clean pajamas and let him play with his monster trucks in the living room. Then I opened my laptop. I had questions. Too many. I searched for the beach. The first few results were normal. Tourism pages, weather reports, pictures. Then I found an old article from a local news site. Authorities warning visitors to avoid certain tide pools during unusually low tides. The reason given was unstable rocks and dangerous currents. Nothing about creatures. I searched again. Disappearances near the beach. Several results appeared. A fisherman, a teenage swimmer, a tourist, a young boy. The dates went back decades. My stomach tightened. Then I searched something more specific. Old fisherman starfish curse. The results filled the screen. Local legends, old message boards, archived newspaper articles, stories from tourists. I opened one, then another, then another. The same fisherman appeared again and again. 20 years earlier, he had been well known in the small coastal town. According to one article, he had been one of the area's best crab fishermen. People said he could predict storms before weather reports. He knew every hidden cove and dangerous current along that coastline. Then one morning, he went out alone. He told people he wanted to explore newly exposed rock formations near the beach, the same beach we had visited. His boat was found 2 days later, empty. No body, no blood, no explanation. The fisherman was declared dead years later. But there were stories. Tourists claimed they sometimes saw an old man walking along the shore in a yellow raincoat. Some said he warned them not to disturb the tide pools. Others claimed he disappeared when they turned away. One woman wrote that she had seen him standing in deep water without sinking. I leaned closer to the screen. A witness description caught my attention. Yellow raincoat, blue knitted cap, black boots, wooden pipe. My mouth went dry. This can't be real, I whispered. I leaned back in my chair. If the fisherman had died 20 years ago, then who had spoken to us? I suddenly remembered his words. It'll curse you. Touch them. And the sea remembers. I closed the laptop. My son was still playing on the carpet. He pushed a red monster truck across the floor and made engine noises with his mouth. So normal. Everything inside that room felt normal. The television, the lamp, the couch, his toys, our family pictures. The ocean felt impossibly far away. I told myself we were safe. We had driven 3 hours inland. Whatever had happened at that beach was over. I needed to stop thinking about it. I needed sleep. Tomorrow, my wife would come home and I would somehow explain everything. Maybe I wouldn't tell her all of it. Maybe I would tell her we had seen some dangerous wildlife and left early. Then I heard something from the kitchen. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. My son continued playing. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was light but clear. Something hitting glass. I stood. What is that? Tap, tap, tap. It came from the kitchen window. I slowly walked toward it. My injured cheek began throbbing again. I stepped into the kitchen. A huge seagull stood outside the window. It repeatedly struck the glass with its beak. Tap, tap, tap. The bird stopped when it saw me. For several seconds, we stared at each other. Its black eyes seemed strangely focused. Then it screamed. The sound was sharp and ugly. The seagull spread its wings and flew away. The sudden beating of its wings sounded like a small whirlwind. I let out a breath. Just a bird. I almost laughed. Then I saw the sink. My body went completely still. Something yellow was draped over the faucet. At first, my brain refused to understand what I was looking at. Then one of the limbs slowly moved. A massive starfish, the same translucent yellow color, the same unnatural size. Its body was wrapped around the metal faucet. 5 thick arms hung over the edges of the sink. Water dripped from them. Not tap water, seawater. I could smell the salt. Drops fell steadily onto the kitchen floor. Plop, plop, plop. My son called from the living room. Dad? I couldn't answer. The starfish slowly tightened around the faucet. Its body pulsed. Once, twice. Then I noticed something that made every hair on my body stand up. There was sand in the sink, wet beach sand, and tiny pieces of dark seaweed. I stepped backward. 3 hours. We lived 3 hours from the coast. There was no possible way it could be here. Then a memory returned to me. The old fisherman standing in the water, his expression, his warning. The ocean remembers. The yellow starfish shifted again. One arm slowly lifted from the sink. It pointed toward me. I don't know how else to describe it. It pointed. Then another sound came from somewhere outside the house. Scrape. I turned toward the back door. Scrape. Something dragged across the patio. Then came a wet, clicking noise. The same sound the creature had made on the beach. My heart stopped. Dad? My son was closer now. I spun around. Stay in the living room. He froze. His face changed. Why? Just stay there. The clicking outside became louder. Click, click, click. Something bumped against the back door. I looked at the yellow starfish again. Its body seemed larger now, almost swollen. The translucent skin moved with a slow heartbeat. Then all 5 arms lifted, and somewhere outside, something scratched against the kitchen window. I finally understood. We hadn't escaped the beach. We had only brought part of it home. Story 5. I have spent years wondering whether I should ever tell anyone about what happened to me that summer. Every time I tried to explain it to someone, I ended up regretting it. Family members would look at me like I had misunderstood something. Friends would laugh nervously, then ask if I was exaggerating. A few people even suggested I had probably dreamed it, or made the whole thing up because I wanted attention. After hearing those reactions enough times, I stopped talking about it. I learned that some stories are easier to carry alone than to explain to people who have already decided not to believe you. Still, I have never forgotten what happened. Even now, after all these years, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night with the sound of static in my head. Sometimes I dream that I am back inside that underground parking garage, walking alone between the concrete columns while something watches me from the darkness. Other times I hear that voice again, clear and sharp through an old walkie-talkie. Look at me. Those words still make my stomach tighten. Maybe writing everything down will finally help. Maybe putting the memory into words will make it feel less powerful. Or maybe it will only make me remember more. It happened during the summer of 2005. I had just finished the school year, and like most people my age, I needed money. I wanted a summer job, but I did not want anything too difficult. I had no interest in spending July working outside in the heat or carrying heavy boxes in some warehouse. I wanted something simple. That was when I heard that the shopping mall in my city needed a night security guard for its underground parking garage. The pay was decent for someone my age, and the job sounded almost too easy. I would sit in a small security booth during the night, watch the parking area, make a round once every hour, and report anything unusual to the guards working inside the shopping mall. That was basically it. The shopping mall itself was fairly large and popular, but after closing time, it became almost completely silent. The parking garage was built entirely underground, underneath several sections of the building. During the daytime, it was always crowded with cars, people carrying shopping bags, families, teenagers, delivery workers, and employees. At night, however, it was a completely different place. I did not think about that when I accepted the job. In fact, the underground location seemed like an advantage. That summer was especially hot, and I liked the idea that I would spend my nights protected from the heat. No rain, no wind, no mosquitoes, no burning sun. Just me, a chair, a small television, and several hours of peace. At least that was what I expected. On my first night, I arrived around 20 minutes early. Part of the reason was that I wanted to make a good impression. The other reason was simply that I had nothing better to do at home. The guard working the previous shift was a man who looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s. I do not remember his full name anymore. I think his first name may have been Carlos or Carl, but I cannot say for certain. He seemed friendly enough. When I arrived, he was sitting inside the booth with a cup of coffee and a newspaper. He welcomed me, then spent the next 15 minutes explaining the routine. There's not much to it, he told me. You make a round every hour, check the exits, make sure nobody's hiding down here, check for damaged cars, broken lights, anything unusual. I asked whether anything serious ever happened. He laughed. Almost never. That answer made me relax. He showed me the walkie-talkie. It was an old black device with a long antenna and scratched buttons. You keep this with you every time you leave the booth, he said. The security guards upstairs use the same channel. If anything happens, you call them. I nodded. He explained that the guards inside the mall sometimes did their own rounds, but they usually stayed upstairs after closing because that was where most of the important areas were. The parking garage was mostly my responsibility. Before leaving, he showed me where the emergency phone was, how to open the exit gate manually, and where the extra flashlight batteries were stored. Then his shift ended. He grabbed his jacket, told me to enjoy the night, and left. For the first time, I was alone. I remember sitting in the booth and looking around. There was not much inside. A desk, a chair, a small television, a radio, a deck of cards with several cards missing, an old coffee maker stained brown around the bottom, a drawer filled with pens, old paperwork, batteries, and random keys. To someone else, it might have looked depressing. To me, it looked perfect. I was getting paid to drink coffee and watch television. The first few hours passed quickly. Employees from the mall left one by one. Cars disappeared from the parking spaces. A cleaning crew drove away sometime before midnight. Eventually, the garage became empty. From inside the security booth, I could see a large part of the parking area through the windows. Rows of concrete columns disappeared into the distance. The ceiling was low, filled with pipes and fluorescent lights. Every few seconds, one of the lights gave a soft, buzzing sound. Some parts of the garage were brighter than others. Certain corners remained dark because a few lights had burned out. I did not find that frightening at first. Every hour, I left the booth and walked through the garage. The round usually took around 10 or 15 minutes. I would walk past the rows of empty parking spaces, shine my flashlight behind large columns, check the emergency exits, then return to the booth. Nothing happened during the first couple of rounds. It was during the third or fourth one that the walkie-talkie suddenly crackled. I stopped walking. Static came through the speaker, not a voice, just white noise. It came in short bursts. Ksh, then silence. Ksh, then silence again. I looked at the walkie-talkie. "Hello?" I said. There was no answer. The noise continued for several seconds, then disappeared. I did not think much of it. The equipment was old. The previous guard had already told me that the radio sometimes had problems. Maybe one of the guards upstairs had pressed the button accidentally. Maybe we were picking up a signal from another nearby building. I continued walking. The rest of the night was completely normal. By sunrise, I was tired but happy. Nothing had gone wrong. The morning guard arrived. I gave him the walkie-talkie, told him everything had been quiet, and went home. I slept most of the day. The following evening, I returned for my second shift. Again, I arrived early. The same guard from the previous night was there. We talked casually while he prepared to leave. I remember we were discussing something unimportant, probably sports or music, when he suddenly stopped and looked at me. "You didn't hear anything strange last night, did you?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. For a second, his expression changed. He looked uncomfortable. "Nothing," he said. I laughed. "No, seriously. What am I supposed to hear?" He forced a smile. "Forget it. I'm just messing with you." But he was not. I could tell. There was something in his face that made me uncomfortable. He immediately changed the subject, then left a few minutes later. I stood inside the booth, watching him walk toward the exit. His question stayed in my mind. "You didn't hear anything strange last night, did you?" I thought about the static. I considered calling him back and asking what he meant, but I decided it would make me look nervous. So I told myself he had been joking. The first hours of that second night were normal, but the atmosphere felt different. Nothing had actually changed. The garage looked exactly the same. The lights buzzed. The concrete columns stood in the same places. The security booth still felt safe. Yet I could not relax. Every time I looked through the window, I expected to see someone standing between the columns. During my rounds, I became more aware of the darkness. My footsteps echoed through the garage. Tap, tap, tap. Every sound returned to me from another direction. Sometimes I would stop walking because I thought I heard another set of footsteps. Then I would realize it was only my own echo. At least that was what I told myself. Around midnight, the walkie-talkie crackled again. Static filled the speaker. This time, I froze. Ksh! I lifted it toward my face. Security? No answer. The static continued. Then, underneath the noise, I heard something. A voice, very faint, distorted. I could not understand the words. It sounded far away, like someone trying to speak through several walls. I pressed the button. "Can anyone hear me?" A guard from inside the mall answered immediately. His voice was perfectly clear. "Yeah, we hear you. Were you trying to call me?" "No." I looked down at the radio. "I'm getting some kind of transmission." "What kind?" "I don't know. Static. Maybe someone talking." There was a pause. Another guard joined the conversation. "We haven't transmitted anything." "Could someone else be on the same frequency?" "Possible." We talked about it for another minute. They suggested the walkie-talkie was probably malfunctioning. One of them joked that I was picking up taxi drivers or police radios. I laughed, but I was not really amused. The strange transmission stopped. I returned to the booth. After that, the night became increasingly uncomfortable. I tried watching television, but I could not focus. Every few minutes, I looked toward the window. Nothing was there. Still, I had the strong feeling that someone was somewhere inside the garage. Watching, waiting. At around 2 in the morning, I had just finished another round. I returned to the booth, placed the flashlight on the desk, and sat down. Maybe 30 seconds later, a loud bang echoed through the parking garage. I jumped out of the chair. The sound was not subtle. Something had hit the concrete floor hard. I stood still, listening. Silence. Then a faint rolling sound. Something moving slowly across the floor. I picked up my flashlight. I considered calling the guards upstairs, but I felt embarrassed. What would I say? I heard something. I opened the booth door. The garage seemed darker than before. "Hello?" I called. My voice echoed. No answer. I stepped outside. The rolling sound had stopped. I moved slowly toward the direction where I had heard the bang. My flashlight swept across empty parking spaces. Columns, concrete walls, nothing. I kept walking. Then the beam landed on something lying in the middle of the aisle. A soccer ball. I stopped. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. It was an ordinary ball, white with dark patches, slightly dirty, completely motionless. I'd walked through that exact area less than 5 minutes earlier. There had been nothing there. I knew that. I had checked the row. There were no cars, no people, no open doors, nothing. I looked around. "Hello?" Silence. I raised the walkie-talkie. "Is anyone downstairs?" One of the guards answered. "No." "Why?" I kept looking at the ball. "There's a soccer ball here." There was a pause. "A what?" "A ball. In the middle of the garage." The guard laughed. "Maybe someone left it earlier." "No." "What?" "It wasn't here 5 minutes ago." Another pause. "Could have rolled out from somewhere." I looked at the nearest parking spaces. There was nowhere for it to have come from. The floor was almost level. Even if someone had left a ball somewhere, it could not have suddenly rolled into the middle of the aisle by itself. I did not answer. Something inside me told me to return to the booth. Immediately, I turned around. For a moment, I had the terrible feeling that something would be standing behind me. There was nothing. I walked faster. Then I started running. I reached the booth, rushed inside, locked the door, and pulled the chair close to the desk. I told myself I would not do another round. I did not care if I got in trouble. I was staying inside until morning. For the next 20 minutes, I watched the soccer ball through the window. I could barely see it from the booth, but I knew exactly where it was. It never moved. Eventually, the fear began to fade. I felt embarrassed. Maybe the ball really had rolled from somewhere. Maybe someone had forgotten it under a car earlier in the day, and it had slowly moved out. Maybe vibrations from traffic above had caused it to roll. I knew those explanations were weak, but I needed something logical. I made coffee. I turned the television louder. A comedy show was playing. I watched without paying much attention. For a while, nothing happened. Then the walkie-talkie turned on. There was no static, no interference, no crackling, only a voice.